he chuckled. Not a warm laugh, not a laugh of humor or humility. It was a smug, clipped sound, the kind of laugh that carried the weight of privilege and dismissal. In that single, arrogant noise, Brett Kavanaugh revealed everything America needed to know about him. The chamber heard it, the cameras caught it, and Jasmine Crockett, sitting across the room, her expression carved into unshakable focus, absorbed it like a challenge. The sound lingered, almost echoing in the silence that followed. For a brief second, it wasn't just a man laughing at a woman's words. It was the voice of power, mocking dignity. It was the sneer of someone who believed the rules did not apply to him, who believed his seat on the highest bench in the nation made him untouchable. But Crockett didn't flinch. Her eyes narrowed, her lips pressed into the kind of line that says, "Not today." While others might have let the moment pass, might have let that chuckle slide into history as one more act of arrogance. The audience watching live could sense it. The people scrolling through their feeds at home could feel it too. Something was about to happen, because in that moment, the room divided itself. On one side sat the embodiment of smug authority, a justice, secure in his seat, leaning back with an amused smirk as if to say, "Your words don't matter." On the other side sat Crockett, the firebrand Congresswoman who had built her career on refusing to be silenced, whose every syllable was drawn from lived struggle, community, and defiance. And as the cameras zoomed, lingering on her expression, the audience saw what Kavanaugh could not, that the laughter was not breaking her hit, was building her. Every second that smug grin stretched across his face was fuel. Every shake of his shoulders was another brick in the wall of arrogance she was about to tear down. The air in the chamber tightened. Staffers shifted in their seats. The nation watching could feel a reckoning on the horizon. His laugh was not the end of the moment. It was the spark. And the silence after, thick and tense, was the drum roll before the explosion. But to understand why this single exchange became unforgettable, we need to rewind. The hearing was never supposed to be dramatic. On paper, it was just another day in the long calendar of oversight, another string of questions and answers that would fade into the endless news cycle. But beneath the routine, something bigger was at play. This was not simply about statutes, precedents, or legal jargon. It was about power. It was about who gets to speak, who gets to be heard, and who gets to dismiss voices that threatened the comfortable silence of privilege. For months, tension had been simmering in the public. Stories of unchecked arrogance, of decisions that tilted scales against ordinary people, were stacking higher and higher. The American public was restless, angry, and waiting for anyone to call out what too often went unchallenged. The hearing became a stage where the imbalance of justice itself seemed to sit in plain view. Enter Jasmine Crockett. Unlike the marble pillars that surrounded the chamber, she did not carry the weight of privilege. She carried the weight of lived reality of communities pushed aside, of voices muted, of identities dismissed. In the days before the hearing, she prepared quietly. No theatrics, no loud pronouncements, just a deliberate gathering of facts, questions, and conviction. For her, this wasn't just about scoring a headline or a viral clip. It was about representing people who had long been told to wait their turn, to quiet down, to accept less. Meanwhile, the media smelled the sparks before they flew. Commentators whispered that Crockett might bring a rare fire to the proceedings. Clips from past confrontations were replayed as if they were trailers for the drama about to unfold. The anticipation built, and by the morning of the hearing, it was no longer just another day in Washington. It was the moment people tuned in to see whether truth could cut through the performance of power. Inside the chamber, the atmosphere carried that tension. The justices, seated like untouchable statues, gave off the air of permanence. Yet to those watching closely, it wasn't permanence, it was arrogance, an unspoken belief that they were above reproach, untouchable, even when laughter leaked into places where dignity belonged. And for millions of Americans watching, this wasn't abstract. It wasn't politics as usual. It was personal. Because when someone in authority chuckles at your lived experience, when they smirk at your demand for fairness, it feels like the entire system is laughing at you. This was the emotional undercurrent pulsing beneath the polished wood and legal arguments. Dignity itself was on trial. Crockett knew this. She knew the stakes weren't just her reputation or her political standing, they were the credibility of those she represented. Every word she carried into that chamber had to echo louder than the smugness across from her. And so, while others may have braced for spectacle, she braced for clarity. She was steady, unshaken, resolved. The tension reached beyond the chamber walls. On social media, activists and community leaders typed furiously, preparing to amplify every syllable. Viewers settled into couches with the quiet hope that someone, finally, would give voice to their frustration. The hum of anticipation grew louder, swelling into a question hanging in the air. Would Crockett's calm determination meet arrogance head-on? And then it happened. A moment so small in action, yet seismic in meaning. The laughter, not the kind that warms a room, but the kind that belittles. A smug chuckle that tried to reduce her words to nothing. And with that, a routine hearing transformed into a historic showdown. Brett Kavanaugh didn't invent arrogance, but to many watching, he perfected the performance of it. His demeanor, polished and deliberate, carried the kind of calm that isn't born of wisdom, but of certainty. The certainty that comes when life has rarely told you no. It was the posture of a man who had always been taken seriously, whose words were never doubted, whose seat was guaranteed long before he even stepped into the chamber. That certainty oozed through the chuckle. It wasn't loud, it wasn't forced. It was casual, as though her argument was nothing more than background noise. To the untrained eye, it might have seemed small, harmless even. But to the millions who have had their voices dismissed with a smirk or a laugh, it rang like a siren. The arrogance was unmistakable. This was not new. Kavanaugh's story has always been tied to privilege. From elite schools to well-connected mentors, his path through the halls of power was paved smoother than most Americans could dream of. And with every rung he climbed, the smirk became more permanent. In his world, laughter wasn't joy, was a weapon, a way to puncture the air around critics without ever lifting a finger. Why argue when a scoff says it all? Why engage when you can diminish with a grin? Viewers who remembered his past appearances felt the sting instantly. They'd seen the pattern before. The polished language, the controlled tone, the little flashes of disdain when challenged. The chuckle was just the latest chapter in a long-running performance of entitlement. It carried the weight of every workplace where a woman was talked over, every community leader who was waved aside, every immigrant who was told their concerns weren't serious enough, and that was why it cut so deep. It wasn't simply Brett Kavanaugh laughing. It was the institution he represented. It was the centuries-old system that told ordinary people their struggles were trivial compared to the comfort of the powerful. Watching him lean back in his chair, lips curled into that smug expression, was like seeing the mask slip. Behind the calm exterior was the truth, dismissal. At home, the audience reacted instantly. Phones lit up with texts. Did he just laugh at her? Clips of the moment began circulating in real time, slowed down, zoomed in, replayed with captions that screamed what so many felt: disrespect. The chuckle was no longer just a sound. It was a symbol. And symbols are dangerous, because they spread faster than words. The response was visceral. For some, it recalled moments in their own lives when they were belittled for daring to speak. For others, it confirmed what they had long suspected about those perched in marble halls, that their calmness wasn't grace, it was indifference. The smugness wasn't confidence, it was insulation. He laughed because he believed there would be no consequence. He laughed because he thought dignity could be brushed aside like a minor inconvenience. But what he underestimated was the stage he was standing on. Cameras don't just record, they amplify. And in that chamber, with the eyes of the nation fixed on every twitch, his arrogance became impossible to hide. His laugh, intended to be dismissive, instead broadcast a truth he likely wished to keep quiet, that he did not take her seriously. In the moment the public caught it, the narrative shifted. Suddenly, this wasn't just another hearing. It was a confrontation between two Americas. One represented by the smirk of a man who had always been told his place was secure. The other embodied by the poised silence of a woman who had fought for every inch of ground she stood on. Kavanaugh leaned back, unaware of the storm brewing outside those walls. For him, the chuckle was nothing. For the country, it was everything. Social media feeds filled with captions. This is why people don't trust them. That laugh says it all. He thinks he's untouchable. In that single moment, the arrogance that had carried him this far became the very trait that exposed him. His calm demeanor, once praised as judicial poise, now looked like condescension under the spotlight. And the laugh, small though it seemed, echoed louder than any argument he could have made. He thought it was harmless. He thought it was just another way to brush aside what he didn't want to hear. But little did he know, the laugh would be the very weapon that brought him down. Long before she ever sat across from Brett Kavanaugh, Jasmine Crockett had learned what it meant to be underestimated. Growing up, she didn't inherit marble pillars or cushioned pathways. She inherited grit. She inherited the daily lessons of perseverance, taught not in lecture halls of privilege, but in households where every dollar mattered, every opportunity was fought for, and every victory was personal. Her story begins not with entitlement, but with service. While Kavanaugh's world was built to elevate him, Crockett's world demanded she elevate others. She studied, worked, and pushed herself, not because the system opened its doors for her, but because she learned to push those doors open with her own two hands. Before the bright lights of Washington, she was on the ground as a public defender. Day after day, she stood between ordinary people and a system that too often saw them as disposable. In crowded courtrooms with weary families looking on, Crockett learned the weight of representation. She wasn't fighting for theories, she was fighting for lives, for futures that could collapse with a single judgment. It was there that her voice sharpened, not out of vanity, but out of necessity. If she didn't speak with clarity, someone's freedom would be lost. This was the crucible where her fire was forged. While Kavanaugh was shielded from the grind of ordinary struggle, Crockett lived inside it. She knew what it meant to carry communities on her back, to answer their calls in the middle of the night, to feel the fear in their voices when they faced the machinery of power. Every case she took, every argument she made, planted in her the conviction that truth, spoken boldly, could cut through arrogance. Her rise to Congress was never inevitable. It was improbable. But improbable is where she thrives. From the moment she entered politics, she carried the energy of someone who had nothing to prove to the powerful and everything to prove for the people. She wasn't polished into the role. She was propelled into it by the raw urgency of voices demanding someone who would not flinch. This is why she unnerves men like Kavanaugh. Because while his confidence was handed to him, hers was earned. His calm is rooted in insulation. Hers is rooted in resilience. He smirks because he has never truly been tested. She speaks with fire because she has lived the test every single day for Crockett. Every committee hearing, every question, every confrontation is an extension of the work she began long before Washington ever knew her name. It's the same fight, just on a larger stage. And when the cameras roll, she isn't playing to them. She is channeling every dismissed voice, every silenced protest, every ignored plea. Her presence is their presence. This is why, when the hearing began, she didn't come armed with arrogance. She came armed with clarity. The nation saw her calm preparation, but those who knew her best recognized the quiet before the storm. They had seen that composure before the stillness of someone who knows exactly when and how to strike. And strike she would, because when Kavanaugh laughed, he wasn't just mocking her words. He was mocking everything she represented. The fight of ordinary people to be heard in rooms designed to exclude them. That chuckle was meant to shrink her. But what he didn't realize was that her entire life had been preparing her for men like him. Men who smirk when they should listen. Men who dismiss when they should reckon. For every second his laugh lingered, her resolve grew sharper. The audience at home, watching the split screen, his smirk against her silence could feel it. They recognized that expression on her face. It was the look of someone who has been underestimated 1,000 times before and has learned to turn condescension into fuel. This was not a clash of equals. This was a collision of worlds. On one side, privilege polished into arrogance. On the other, grit molded into fire. And the country watching knew which one they were rooting for. Her story was not one of shortcuts or quiet corridors of power. It was one of trial, resilience, and relentless truth-telling. That is why her presence that is why her voice cuts through. Because when she speaks, she isn't just defending herself, she is defending every person who has ever been laughed at, dismissed, or silenced. And so, as the chamber settled into silence after his chuckle, Crockett did what she has always done. She didn't flinch. She didn't retreat. She leaned in, the weight of her journey behind her, and prepared to answer. And when she finally leaned forward to answer, her words cut sharper than any gavel. The chamber was thick with silence after the chuckle. It wasn't the silence of commit, it was the silence of anticipation. Of everyone present, realizing they had just witnessed a spark, and waiting to see if it would ignite into flame. Kavanaugh leaned back in his chair, still wearing that smug half-smile, the faintest trace of amusement lingering on his face, as though Crockett's presence were little more than a formality. But Crockett didn't blink. Her posture remained steady, her tone, even though her eyes told another story. They sharpened, like a blade being pulled slowly from its sheath. Every inch of her body radiated composure, but beneath that stillness was momentum. She was loading her words, readying them like arrows drawn against the string. Kavanaugh shifted again, chuckling once more as she pressed her point. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even theatrical. It was quiet, controlled, the kind of dismissive laugh one uses when they believe they are untouchable. To him, it was nothing. To the room, it was everything. The staffers, sitting along the edges of the chamber, exchanged quick glances. Spectators leaned forward in their seats. Even the air felt like it paused, waiting for what would follow. Because everyone knew what Crockett was about. She didn't let arrogance walk by unchallenged. And this smirk, this chuckle, this dripping condescension was arrogance in its purest form. She began carefully, her voice calm and deliberate, not rushing, not raising her tone. Each word landed like a pebble in a still pond, sending ripples through the silence. She didn't match his laughter with fire, not yet. Instead, she did something far more devastating. She remained utterly unshaken. The steadiness of her response was its own rebuke. The contrast grew sharper with every exchange. On one side, the justice smirked, shoulders loose, treating the moment as a minor annoyance. On the other side, the Congresswoman carved her words with precision, her focus unwavering, her resolve unbreakable. The clash wasn't loud or chaotic. It was quiet, tense, and cinematic, like two forces circling each other. One overconfident and the other coiled, ready to strike. Viewers watching from home felt their breath catch. They had seen dismissiveness like this before, in classrooms, in workplaces, in courtrooms. They had been laughed at, spoken over, minimized. And in Crockett's.com, they saw their vindication forming. She wasn't rattled. She wasn't shrinking. She was preparing. Kavanaugh laughed again, softer this time, but the smirk never left his face. It was arrogance, layered in confidence, the kind that assumes power will always win. But his smirk was betraying him, because every laugh pulled more people onto Crockett's side. Every chuckle made his poise look smaller, not larger. And then her gaze locked on him. She leaned just slightly forward, the subtle signal that the exchange was about to change. Her voice cooled, her delivery sharpened, every syllable carrying the weight of her story, her struggle, her community. The chamber stilled. The room felt like it tilted toward her. Spectators barely breathed. The tension was unbearable. A rope pulled tighter and tighter between them. Kavanaugh smirked again, certain he was still in control. But Crockett's composure wasn't weakness. It was the drum roll before the crash of thunder. The words were coming. Everyone could feel it. The moment was cresting, rising to the point of no return. Then came the line, the cold response that silenced him instantly. The pause was everything. For a heartbeat, Crockett let the silence stretch, refusing to fill it quickly, refusing to rush into the trap of reacting with anger. The chamber waited, almost holding its breath. Kavanaugh, still leaning back, let out a faint smirk. The ghost of his chuckle still hanging in the air, as if daring her to speak, and then she did. Her words came slow at first, every syllable enunciated with surgical precision. "When you laugh," she began, her voice steady, "you reveal more than you realize." The phrase landed heavy, not shouted, not forced, but delivered with a calm that cut sharper than rage ever could. The smirk faded just slightly. Kavanaugh's eyes flickered, the briefest sign that he had not expected her to meet him with ice instead of fire. "You don't laugh at me. You laugh at the people who sent me here. You laugh at the communities that fight every day to be taken seriously in rooms like this. You laugh at the idea that their truth deserves the same respect as your power." The silence that followed was louder than any outburst. Even the faint rustle of paper from staffers seemed intrusive. Crockett didn't move. She let the weight of her words sink in. Let the chamber feel the chill of her rebuttal. Then she leaned in further, her eyes locked directly on him. "But let me make this clear. I am not here for your amusement. I am here for accountability. And if my presence makes you uncomfortable enough to laugh, then perhaps it's because you know the answers you've given this country can't withstand real questions. The room shifted. Kavanaugh's posture stiffened. He no longer leaned back with casual ease. His shoulders squared, his hands tightened around the edges of the desk. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The confidence that once flowed so easily was beginning to crumble. Crockett pressed on. "I come from people who have had to fight for every inch of space in this democracy. And every laugh like yours, every smirk like yours, has been used to tell them they don't belong. Well, I do belong, and so do they. And no amount of condescension from this bench will erase that truth." The chamber froze. For a split second, time seemed suspended. Then, a faint murmur rose from the back rows. Someone shifted, a cough echoed, but the silence reclaimed control as quickly as it had broken. On television screens across the country, audiences reacted instantly. Viewers at home sat forward, their jaws tightening, some whispering yes under their breath. On social media, clips were already being pulled. The slow-motion replay of Kavanaugh's chuckle, followed by Crockett's piercing words, began circulating within minutes. Captions appeared. "This is how you answer arrogance." Crockett just ended him with one line. Inside the chamber, Kavanaugh tried to recover. He adjusted his notes, looked down briefly, then back up, forcing his expression back into neutrality. But the damage was visible. His jaw tightened, his composure faltered. He no longer looked untouchable. He looked cornered. Crockett did not relent. "Respect is not a gift," she said firmly, "and it is not optional. It is the bare minimum this institution owes to the people who live under its decisions. And if you can't even grant that in this room, then what faith should the people have in the rulings that come from this bench?" The weight of the question hung heavy. It wasn't just directed at him, it was directed at the institution itself. At every symbol of privilege sitting silently beside him, reaction shots told the story. A staffer looked down, biting their lip. A colleague glanced sideways, uneasy. Even the stillness of the other justices could not mask the discomfort that filled the air. And yet Crockett remained calm, her delivery unbroken. She did not raise her voice. She did not let anger spill. She was ice, and the colder her tone became, the more powerful her presence grew. For the audience, it was unforgettable. Memes sprang up instantly. Split screens of Kavanaugh's laugh beside Crockett's glare. Captions like, "Who's laughing now?" spread like wildfire. Reaction videos filled feeds, commentators pausing after her lines just to let the weight sink in again. Crockett had not only silenced the chuckle, had transformed it into a symbol of arrogance undone. She turned what was meant to belittle into a stage for her fiercest truth. By the time she finished, the room was no longer his, it was hers. The silence wasn't dismissive anymore. It was reverent. Even those who disagreed with her politics could not deny the authority with which she spoke. And Kavanaugh? He sat still, his smirk erased, his eyes cast downward for the briefest of moments. His laugh, once a weapon, had been flipped against him. Crockett leaned back, not in triumph, but in calm completion. Her point was made. Her fire had been delivered with the precision of a blade. She didn't need to raise her voice. She had already won. The chamber would move on, as hearings always do, but the country would not forget. The replay of that exchange was already burning across every platform, every feed, every news outlet. The laugh had been his moment. The rebuttal was hers, and the ripple effect was only beginning, because while Crockett sat steady, the audience outside was rising, voices multiplying, reactions pouring in. But the real storm was only beginning. Outside the chamber, the exchange may have lasted less than 2 minutes inside the chamber, but outside its walls, it detonated like an earthquake by the time Crockett returned to her seat. Clips of her icy rebuttal were already flooding. The moment spread at lightning speed, first through live-tweeting journalists, then through Instagram Reels, TikTok edits, and YouTube compilations. Within an hour, hashtags like hashtag Crockett clap back, hashtag laughing no more, and hashtag she shut him down were trending nationally. What struck people most wasn't just her words, it was the silence that followed. Commentators replayed the footage, pointing out the exact frame where Kavanaugh's chuckle faltered and his posture stiffened. Side-by-side edits appeared, his smirk dissolving, her stare sharpening. Viewers couldn't stop looping it, savoring the shift in power. For everyday Americans, it felt like a release. On Facebook, one woman wrote, "I've been dismissed with that same laugh in boardrooms, classrooms, and family dinners. Watching her shut it down gave me chills. A high school teacher in Detroit posted, "This clip is going into my civics lesson tomorrow." This is what standing your ground with dignity looks like. Influencers joined in almost immediately. A comedian stitched the video on TikTok, pausing after her line to simply sip tea and raise an eyebrow. Another added dramatic music beneath her words, turning it into a mock movie trailer in a world where laughter is power. One congresswoman fights back. It went viral overnight. But the most powerful reactions weren't jokes, they were personal stories. Women across professions, nurses, lawyers, teachers, retail workers shared their own experiences of being laughed at, dismissed, or mocked, and how seeing Crockett's composure lit something inside them. "That's the moment I've always wished I had," one user commented. "She gave it to all of us." Politicians also weighed in. Allies praised her composure as a lesson in poise under pressure, while even some opponents admitted the optics were brutal for Kavanaugh. One pundit on a conservative network begrudgingly noted, "You don't want to be the guy caught chuckling at a serious question on national television." News outlets framed it as the moment that shut him down. Headlines leaned into the drama. Crockett's chill versus Kavanaugh's chuckle, from smirk to silence, and the laugh heard and answered across America. Editorials debated whether it was just optics or something deeper. A cultural turning point in how dismissiveness is challenged in public life. The emotional trigger was clear. It wasn't about politics alone, it was about dignity. Crockett's cold response was more than a rebuttal. It was a collective catharsis. Viewers who had carried years of small humiliations, of laughter weaponized against them, suddenly saw those experiences mirrored and answered in real time. It was as if she wasn't just speaking for herself, but for millions. The comment sections reflected it. She spoke with the calm of every woman who's been underestimated, that silence after her words. That was all of us holding our heads a little higher. He thought it was funny until it wasn't. As days passed, late-night hosts replayed the exchange, dramatizing Kavanaugh's chuckle and then cutting abruptly to Crockett's words. Audiences roared, applauding the reversal. Memes cemented the narrative. The laugh had been arrogance. Her response, justice. The symbolism grew larger. Commentators on podcasts described it as a battle between dismissal and dignity. Columnists wrote about how her measured tone represented a new model for confrontation, not matching mockery with outrage, but answering it with clarity so sharp it became unforgettable. And the story didn't fade. Instead, it snowballed. College students shared the clip at rallies. Teachers used it in classrooms. Activists spliced her line into campaign ads and motivational edits. The moment became more than viral, it became iconic, because what people saw wasn't just one person shutting down another. They saw arrogance punctured. They saw the power of composure. They saw that laughter so often used to belittle could be stopped cold and turned back against its source. And in the days that followed, the meaning of that laugh and her response only grew larger. The chamber has emptied. The headlines have moved on, but the echo of that moment remains. What began as a single arrogant chuckle became something larger, something enduring. Because this was never only about one justice or one congresswoman, it was about what happens when arrogance meets dignity, when dismissal collides with determination. History has shown us again and again, power often underestimates those who refuse to bow. Kavanaugh's laugh was centuries-old recycled sneer used in courtrooms, classrooms, boardrooms, and dinner tables to tell someone their words don't matter. But Crockett's response carried something even older: the quiet, unshakable dignity of people who have been counted out, laughed at, ignored, and who refused to be erased. Her composure wasn't just personal, it was generational. It echoed the defiance of those who spoke truth in the face of mockery, who chose stillness when pushed toward silence. It was a reminder that dignity does not need to raise its voice to roar. And that is why the moment landed so deeply. People recognized themselves in her. They saw their own battles reflected in her calm defiance. The moral is not complicated. Arrogance thrives on the belief that laughter can diminish another's worth. But dignity, when it stands tall, exposes that arrogance for what it is: fragile, hollow, temporary. Crockett showed the nation that silence can be shattered, not by shouting, but by clarity. She reminded us that the measure of strength is not how loud one laughs, but how firmly one stands. Across the country, people carried that message into their own lives. Teachers told their students, "See, that's how you confront dismissal with truth." Workers shared the clip before meetings, as a quiet reminder that respect is earned by resilience. Parents pointed to her example, teaching their children that they never have to shrink beneath someone else's smirk. Crockett became more than a congresswoman in that moment. She became a symbol, the image of what happens when dignity meets arrogance and does not bend. And that symbol is powerful because it belongs to everyone who has ever been told they are less. The lesson is universal. Arrogance may hold the microphone, but dignity carries the echo. Arrogance may laugh first, but dignity will always speak last. And when it does, the silence that follows speaks louder than any chuckle ever could. This is why that hearing, routine on the surface, became unforgettable. It wasn't simply a clash of personalities. It was a mirror held up to America, asking, which side do you stand on? The laugh that dismisses, or the dignity that endures? The answer was clear in the cheers, the shares. The millions of people who found themselves rising a little taller after hearing her words. They understood that moments like these are not accidents, they are reminders. Reminders that even in halls built to privilege the powerful, truth can still break through. That laugh, meant to belittle, became the very proof of arrogance's weakness. And Crockett's calm reply became proof of dignity's strength. Together, they formed a story that will outlast both of them. Because in America, the last laugh belongs not to the powerful, but to the people. He chuckled, and thought it was the end of her argument. But Jasmine Crockett's cold, unforgettable response proved it was only the beginning. That single exchange, his arrogance against her unshakable dignity, has now etched itself into the story of our democracy. It was more than a debate. It was a reminder of who we are when we refuse to bow to dismissal, when we choose courage over silence. Moments like these matter. They remind us that arrogance can be loud, but dignity can be louder. That no matter how high the seat of power, truth has the ability to cut through and stand unbroken. Crockett's response wasn't just about silencing one man in one chamber. It was about showing millions watching at home that composure, clarity, and conviction are stronger than any laugh meant to belittle. It's up to us. If you felt that same surge of pride, that same recognition that dignity deserves to win, then don't let this moment fade. Share it. Talk about it. Keep it alive in the conversation. Because every share, every comment, every voice added to the chorus is another way of saying, we will not be mocked into silence. So, if you believe in standing tall when dismissed, if you believe in truth, cutting sharper than arrogance, hit that subscribe button. Join this community, add your voice, and let's keep building a space where justice, pride, and dignity always have the last word. Stay loud, stay proud, and remember, the fight for truth is never over.